and this is our debate that we have planned for the Conceal and Carry legislation that's going through the Missouri Senate right now, and House. But this is really just kind of the second phase of student government's plan to gather student opinion. We had our forum on Tuesday night, and I think a lot of people were there also, and that was getting Sarah Holzmeyer's opinion on this issue, who is the director of DPS here at Truman. Today, we're going to actually be debating this issue, seeing both sides of the argument, etc., etc. So, if you guys don't know, the bills at issue right now are Senate Bills 589 and 731, and House Bills 1899 and 1910. And basically, Senate Bill 589 and House Bill 1899 have identical language. They have all of the, they have Missouri statute, the list of all the places that you cannot conceal and carry. And these bills just strike institutions of higher education out of that statute. Then on the other side, you have Senate Bill 731 and House Bill 1910. Interestingly, Senate Bill 731 is sponsored by Senator Munslinger, who is our senator from this county. And this language is the same as the others, except that it has an exception that institutions of higher education can apply for if they install security systems in every building on campus, hire security personnel to do security checks whenever people are coming in and out of buildings. So essentially, it does the same thing as the other bills. It just technically has an exemption. So tonight, we are going to be debating whether those bills are a good idea or not for this campus. On the affirmative side, we have Jake Buxton and Chester Pestlang. And on the negative side, we have Parker Conover and Zach Holstrom. They're going to each have 4 minutes to do a constructive argument, and after each constructive argument, the other side will be able to cross-examine them for 1.5 minutes. And then after all that, we'll have 2-minute rebuttals, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience. We ask that you go ahead and write down your question so that it stays concise, and then line up down here to give your questions to our moderator, Professor Hennigan. He is the debate coach here at Truman. And he will make sure that if your question is addressed to a specific side, he'll make sure that each side gets an equal number of questions, although each side will have a chance to respond to each question that is asked. I think we have 1 minute for each side to respond to each question. So we just ask that you go ahead and write it down first, and then get it to Professor Hennigan. He's going to regulate that flow. So I think that's everything, and we'll go ahead and get started with our first affirmative speaker.
Good evening, everyone. As Caitlin said, thanks first off, Caitlin, for playing this event. My name is Jake Buxton. I am the chairman of External Affairs on the Student Senate. I'm involved in a host of other organizations on campus that I won't get into. But today we're debating a very hot topic. I'm glad to see that so many people are being engaged and so many people actually want to find out more about this. And we're going to try our best to provide an educational forum for you tonight. So the basic thing that we had talked about when we sat down and said, how can we make this the most educational event possible for students? And so we kind of laid out a format. So the first thing that I'm going to be covering on the basis of the affirmative side of this argument is your personal right to having a concealed carry, and more importantly, to self-defense. So first off, I want to kind of discuss how concealed carry permits, especially the licensing process, has been upheld in the courts in recent history. I'm going to tell you a short story from Illinois. In 2009, a lady named Mary Shepard was volunteering as a treasurer of her church when she was assaulted and beaten by an intruder and left for dead. Her injuries were major, and they were many. She had a crushed skull and a lot of other things that required multiple surgeries for her to recover. Even though Shepard did possess a handgun and also possessed a license to carry that handgun, was trained, went through the process necessary, the state of Illinois banned her from carrying a concealed weapon. And so she sued the state. Her and an organization with her filed suit against the Attorney General of Illinois, who filed a suit to prevent her from enforcing this law. The District Court of Southern Illinois dismissed the case. They said, no, the state of Illinois has a right to do that. They appealed, of course, and it went to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals where it was overturned. And they said that they could not prevent concealed carry and that preventing it was unconstitutional. A few quotes that I pulled out from it. This is from the court case. A gun is a potential danger to more people if carried in public than just kept in the home. But the other side of this coin is that knowing that many law-abiding citizens are walking the streets armed make many criminals timid. Another quote is, some studies have found that an increase in gun ownership causes an increase in homicide rates. Mark Duggan's study, which is something we might hear tonight, I don't know, reported in his article that was entitled More Guns, More Crime. But the issue in this case isn't ownership. The issue in this case is not ownership. It's carrying guns in public. Duggan's study found that even the concealed carrying of guns, which many states do allow, doesn't lead to an increase in gun ownership. Something that's going to be important later on. Just keep that in the back of your mind. And also remember, the Supreme Court upheld in the Helen decision that there is an individual's right to self-defense according to the Second Amendment. So, brief history of how it's been upheld in the courts. You do have an individual right to protect yourself. So, what does it look like in Missouri? In Missouri, we have state law that if you're of age 19, you can obtain a concealed carry permit. That goes into a lot of different things. You have to meet a lot of stipulations. You have to be trained. You have to pass a background check. And you do have to be licensed from the sheriff's office, who does have the right to show judgment in that process. And so we'll get into the standards, I'm sure, a little bit. I'm not going to read them all. I could, but they're in Missouri statutes. So just knowing and understanding the process. But the heart of this whole debate and the heart of the whole argument of the affirmative side that I want to present tonight is that self-defense equals control over the situation. Self-defense equals control over the situation. For many, the proposition of being defenseless in a potentially violent setting is unsettling, myself included in that. Control over the situation is the largest piece of what we argue. So right now, an individual could enter the classroom without being stopped. That's enough reason to accept this thought. You have a right to self-defense. The Supreme Court and all lower courts have upheld that. Now, self-defense could mean multiple things. Let's not forget. Self-defense could, first off, mean it serves as a deterrent, as several studies have shown that is actually effective. I'm sure, again, we'll get into them tonight. It could mean having a weapon to protect yourself that gives you the confidence to safely escape the situation. And it could also mean actually stopping the threat. So understanding all of these issues are very important. And I'm now going to take a few questions.
Yeah, so I guess now kind of cross-examination, so we get to ask questions, and then I'll get present kind of against the bill argument. So I guess, yeah, right. So your Second Amendment right is to bear arms. That's upheld in the courts as you went through, and that involves conceal and carry. So the argument's not a conceal and carry as a whole. I think that this side of the table would support conceal and carry. But these rights, would you agree, do have limits?
I do agree that they have limits, yes. And I think that there are a lot of important issues. Actually, if you look at the Missouri statute, there are several areas where concealed carry is not allowed. Concealed carry are not allowed in arenas that hold over 5,000 people. They're not allowed in preschools. They're not allowed in elementary schools. They're not allowed in lower education schools before you get to higher education. In fact, the bills that we're debating, all they do is strike out the word higher education from an already existing statute. So yes, obviously we have that. But I would caution everyone to understand a core tenet in constitutional law theory. And that's that if you're too focused on the security aspect, then you're going to lose some freedom. And so I think the purpose of us debating tonight is drawing that line. How much freedom are we going to give up for safety, and is it worth it? And so that's the heart of the debate tonight. So yes, I agree, of course. We put limitations on our rights. But I think it's the contention of this side is that it's not worth it, and the statistics show it. Yeah.
So yes, I guess argument. So we all know the Second Amendment. That's why many of us aren't here. We have the right to bear arms, and I don't think either side disputes that. But whether you have the right to bear an arm, conceal and carry on a university campus seems to be a little bit of a different issue. And as Jake said, it does come kind of to security freedom, but it's even more narrow than that. Because the university campus, it's such a narrow limiting of your freedoms that security only plays somewhat of a role. So in 1937, U.S. versus Caroline Products, footnote 4, the judicial system created strict scrutiny. Strict scrutiny allows the Supreme Court, United States court systems, to limit those rights, so curb those rights. So you can't yell fire in a movie theater. It limits your First Amendment right to free speech. Your First Amendment is limited just as your Second Amendment right can indeed be limited. In order to limit rights, two things have to be apparent. There has to be a compelling government interest to limit that right, and limiting that right has to be done in the least restrictive means. So a compelling government interest in, let's say, higher education might actually be higher education. So these compelling government interests don't have to really come from a rational place. So if you're sitting in class and you're afraid, if conceal and carry is legal, that someone might have a gun, and that lessens your participation in that class, it lessens your debate in that class, it lessens your ability to get some sort of higher education in that class, then it does go contrary to the compelling government interest that universities were originally established for. So whether your fear of guns is rational or irrational, whether there are actually guns in the classroom, whether there aren't actually guns in the classroom, because again, you wouldn't necessarily know that if conceal and carry rules are being adhered to. It still is the compelling government interest to ensure that everyone in that classroom can participate in arguments and get the most out of each lesson and most out of each class. And again, it has to be done in the least restrictive means. And really the least restrictive means here is to eliminate guns in the classroom. Another way to do this, again, is kind of the alternative that Dixon's bill presents, is that universities can provide security guards in the front and metal detectors in the front of all buildings. But kind of maybe something left out in that is how much that would cost on Truman's campus and how much the government is willing to contribute to that. It would cost somewhere around $1.5 to $2.2 million to do on Truman's campus. If you're at all familiar with Truman's budget, you know that that's not even close to in the budget. What you also might not know is that the government is not willing, the state government is not willing to contribute any funds to get a security guard or to get a metal detector. And that came up in the hearing on the bill, which was about 2 weeks ago. Jake and I were both at. So really it's a false choice. So the choice is either allow conceal and carry, the bill would pretty much force all universities to allow conceal and carry on campus. And our position is that interferes with the compelling government interest of higher education, and therefore you can actually curb Second Amendment rights on higher education campuses. No, yeah.
Great. Sorry, we're friends. We chitter chatter. Okay, so I'd like to unpack the strict scrutiny thing a little bit. So obviously we agreed in the last cross-examination about the limiting of amendment rights. That's obviously something that happens with that caveat that we talked about. But the compelling reason, the government interest. Would you agree that it is a compelling interest of the government for individuals to stay alive?
Yes.
So
I would hope.
So furthermore, if we have something that is in front of us that would allow individuals to be able to protect themselves better, would that not also be a compelling government interest?
Assuming that gun is statistically proven to be used to protect them and has a high likelihood of being used for self-defense.
Okay. So as long as you can show that that gun is used for self-defense, so I would assume that the counter of that is that there are relatively low statistics out there of people actually using their concealed carry weapons in non-self-defense means, then that would satisfy that argument then? Sorry, it's confusing.
Yeah.
So if there were statistics presented that could potentially show that concealed carry weapons are not used, in fact, the majority of the time used for actual self-defense, and that they are not used for extra self-defense purposes, then would that kind of satisfy this compelling government interest?
If conceal and carry, if the system of conceal and carry is used more often, so the chance of conceal and carry being used to stop a crime is actually, not significant in terms of an actual event happening. Does that kind of make sense?
Okay, so it's the actual significance or the probability of such an event happening on campus?
I think the probability is an important factor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if your probability is 1 in 5 million, let's say, that's not the right one. Zach will get into that, and we'll get into that later. But I mean, the possibility of an active shooter coming on Truman State University campus is just incredibly low. But the chance of an accident happening, or the chance of someone actually chance of an accident happening is high, or the chance of someone using their conceal and carry to prevent that active shooter is just so low then yeah, I don't think there's a compelling government interest for self-defense.
Okay.
That's in that scenario specifically.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Thanks.
All right, my turn. So my name is Chester Felsine. I am the Secretary of College Republicans here at Truman State and also an Associate Senator for Student Senate. I'm going to kind of throw out some statistics for you guys because, you know, we're at Truman, we're all nerds, so we like statistics, we like numbers, that's a good thing. There will be two main portions to my kind of opening statement here. One would be the crime deterrence and how concealed carry on campus would in fact deter crime, would in fact even prevent it from happening. The second portion is mental health and mental illness and how maybe, you know, the media today, especially CNN, Fox News, I'll go on both sides, happen to over-exaggerate many things when it comes to mental illness and gun crimes or any crimes within that nature. So the first thing I'm going to do is, like I said, talk about crime deterrence. The Chicago School of Law mentioned a topic that we actually discussed on Tuesday at the forum with the DPS director, Sarah Holzmeyer, mentioned how universities currently are kind of like a soft target. They don't have any barriers except the men and women who are in the campus police force. So outsiders know that currently we, as students, really have no means of protecting ourselves except if I took Jake off this chair and threw the chair at the person, which, me being me, most likely will not be able to lift that chair. So, moving on to the next topic, I would have to say that the Chicago School of Law mentioned from 1977 to 1992, nearly 1,500 murders were decreased or possibly evaded because of the large area or the large number of concealed carry in the current residences. Now this soft target issue, as I hope we can expand upon more, Zach and I will hopefully expand upon more here, is very pressing, and I think it's very important that we discuss it further in length. Such as the Chicago School of Law also mentions that aggravated assault went down from previous years, went down 60,000 regarding incidences, reported incidences within that category. Next, I mentioned mental health. And currently, Dr. Menzel and Dr. Hashlu are both sociologists, and the other is a legal studies professor, respectively. This mental health topic of debate is a huge stereotypical notion that we, as a society, can lump in within one homogeneous group all people with mental illnesses. Obviously, there is a gray area within there. Okay, and that gray area needs to be explained and examined within length. A journalist named by Jacob Applebaum mentioned that, in fact, people with mental illness only committed 3%. I'm gonna let all of you take this in. 3% of gun crimes from 2010 to 2015. 3% were committed. Were people that committed these crimes, only 3% had mental illness. So the statistic that many people with mental illness commit violent crimes is something that should be examined more and should be examined not in the sense of what we see on TV. There's obviously that gray area that needs to be presented. Kind of moving off what Jake said regarding his opening statement, and this is not something that is going to be, in a sense, forced upon the universities. The universities have many, many avenues of which they can take, especially under Munzinger's Senate bill. They can take many different precautions regarding how to introduce or how to effect change to this. I know Jake and I were talking, we were interested in the possibility of even having kind of a committee to explain and explore, how we can implement this bill into the university life. Because this is a very interesting subject, obviously, because of the amount of people here. And this is a very interesting topic as to how it will affect the university, because it will affect all of us. And I cannot stress enough that we need to continue this dialogue. Even past today, we need to continue this dialogue and continue these notions. I'm ready. Hit me with your question.
Okay, so first of all, I would just like to say that I think it's really important that you brought up that people with mental illnesses generally don't commit these crimes. I agree with you there. I don't have to take any issue with that. It's proven time and time again that people with mental illnesses generally are more of a threat to themselves, and we quote unquote we are more of a threat to them than they are to us. So I don't have any issue with that. But what I would like to ask you about is, so you say that it would be a deterrent to crime. So I would contend that defensive gun uses in the United States are an incredibly rare event. The Department of Justice cited that in 2005, of 30,694 Americans that died in gunfire that year, only 147 of them were lawfully killed by a citizen with a concealed carry license. So how do you reconcile that with?
No, I mean, that's a good question. That's a very good question in the sense that if I was in a room and someone barged through those doors, all right, I would want the fastest, quickest response weapon at my availability, okay? Like I said, I won't be able to lift this chair because, it's me. But I want to be able to use a weapon that is going to increase distance from me and that potential enemy, that victim, not victim, excuse me, but someone else from entering that room. I want to create that distance. I want it to be down here and not up there. So I want something ready. Okay, I want something easy that I can use. And having that gun, having that weapon would also, most likely, by statistics showing, would make that person double think of even coming on campus. Of even saying, okay, I don't know who's armed. Now that I know that that bill passed, because it's going to be in the news, we've already seen it. All I know, as the person with the gun, I know that DPS is not the only organization that has weapons now. So that within itself can be kind of a mental mind game.
So you would argue that the deterrent is maybe not necessarily the actual gun itself and using it in a defensive gun use, but that it would be the idea, so them being aware. I mean, that's fine. We'll leave it.
Okay. We'll continue it later.
Okay, so my name is Zach Holstrom, so I am the Health, Wellness, and Safety Chair for Student Government currently. So I want to talk about why guns on campus don't necessarily make us more safe. So first of all, my first point is that campuses are already secure. So we're kind of trying to combat a problem with this bill that doesn't exist. So college campuses are some of the safest places in America, and we live in a low crime area. So Truman stats for you, some Truman stats for you. So we have an incredibly low incident rate of crime, violent crime, and a lot of statistics that have been shown in the studies side of our opposition that decrease and are deterrents to crime. One of the major violent crimes that are the biggest issue on college campuses is rape. We have incredibly low incidence of other types of violent crimes on campus. Those are the biggest ones talked about most in the media. We have an incredibly low incidence rate of that here at Truman, and we do as well at other major schools in the state, like the zoo, where there was only one cited in their crime report in 2014 at a school of 30,000 people. So those are incredibly low if you look at the rate nationwide of college campuses. And the DOJ, the Department of Justice, also cites that 93% of violent crimes that are committed against college students actually take place off campus. So they don't happen on campus. So if you're carrying a gun on campus, it's not going to be that much of a deterrent because you're much less likely to be attacked on campus than you are off campus, incredibly so. Also, the homicide rate for people on college campuses is 0.07 per 100,000 people. And that's compared to 5.7 per 100,000 for the general population. And for our age group, people 17 to 29, it's 14.7 per 100,000. So you are unbelievably safer on a college campus than you are in most places in the United States already. So I would also like to address this other issue, so that I think it's on people's mind nowadays, is active shooters and the potential of an active shooter coming on campus. So Parker made the argument earlier that this is that's statistically really unlikely. And that holds up when you look at the evidence. So there's also the point that Missouri only requires 8 hours of training to have a concealed carry weapon permit, which is not nearly enough training to combat an active shooter and to be able to really make the right decisions. And also, if you were trying to do that in that situation, it can confuse law enforcement and make it difficult to identify who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. An FBI study showed that from 2000 to 2013, there were 160 active shooter incidents in the United States. Only one of those, so less than 1%, only one, in one instance of 160 was an active shooter in non-college campuses, but anywhere, stopped by a person with a concealed carry permit carrying a gun. All other instances, it was either stopped by the shooter's own volition or another reason. So it's incredibly unlikely that that would actually be something that you could use to deter in that situation. So it's also not a deterrent to crime. It's not been shown to be a deterrent crime in other areas. So guns in the home have been increasingly shown to have a greater likelihood of harming someone in the home than it is to be used in defense of the home itself. And dorms are not necessarily a home, but the same principle would apply in that situation. workplaces that allow guns to be carried are 5 to 7 times more likely to be the site of a homicide. And a study from UC San Francisco showed that access to a firearm makes you 2 times more likely to be the victim of a homicide and 3 times more likely to commit suicide, which is a real a concern on campus with students having more wide access to guns, especially if they're allowed in dorms, which one of the current bills would allow. In that they're more successful when guns are used. Most suicide attempts are used with medication and overdose, which are not very successful, but ones that are attempted with firearms are very successful. And I believe that would increase the risk on our campus of that. Also, the idea of defensive gun uses is a myth. So, for 2.5 million defensive gun uses, that was reported in a study. The most famous study reported that there were 2.5 million in 1992 defensive gun uses in the United States. But this is the contrary to this. There was the study for the National Crime Victimization Survey showed that there were only 34 defensive gun uses in a survey of 90,000 people, which doesn't line up with that data at all. So I'll stop my case with that and allow cross-examination.
All right, Zach. So you mentioned rape on Truman's campus.
Yes.
And some of the sexual assaults. So can you kind of walk me through the correlation, I guess, that you're trying to connect between that and guns?
So I guess what I'm saying is that, I'm saying that the risk of having more guns on campus and the threat that having them available and having them and the potential for accidents and maybe the misuse of one outweighs the potential that it may be a deterrent to crime. So I listed that as because in terms of, so we're talking about deterrent to crime, what I think we're most concerned about is violent crime. And so that's really the only one, especially for Truman State statistics, that really shows up. And so just to cite, so for 2014, there were 6 reported in our crime. That was a high year in our crime report. And the 2 years prior to that, there was only 1 reported. So that's our highest incident of, like, so say the other violence crimes would be, say, aggravated assault or homicide. Those don't really register, but those are the highest one of those categories. So I cited that to say that is the highest one of those violent crimes that we could be deterring, and I'm saying that the risk of having more guns on campus outweighs the potential of crimes that could be deterred by having concealed carries, because they're incredibly low on our campus as well as campuses nationwide.
Okay. And I would follow up with that in the sense of, you also mentioned that it's 3 times more likely for a mass shooting to be off campus than on campus. Can you point that statistic out to me? You mentioned something how.
So 93% of violent crimes that are committed against college students, and this is from the Department of Justice, are committed off campus and not on campus.
So, well,
I can, yeah. I was just looking at the format.
2 negative.
Yeah, it's 2 negatives.
Really a little confusion on the schedule. So yeah, I think Jake's and I argument kind of came down to this security freedom, and then is security really an issue on campus as a whole? Are we willing to sacrifice the opportunities that higher education gives for kind of the red herring that is security on campus as a whole? So I think as Zach went through, security isn't a huge issue on Truman's campus. So it's more of just, does your Second Amendment right in general just to carry outweigh this higher education that people are intended to get at a university? That's really all I got.
Okay, so I just kind of want to wrap up where we are here. Sorry, I kind of have to dip into both just so we make sure we have enough time to talk about everything. But I kind of want to just reiterate that if, kind of what Parker and I were talking about in cross-examination, if we're going to talk about the government having an interest, and if we're going to talk about the issue of the scrutiny, then we have to realize, we have to come to a realization that it might be in the government's interest to allow you to protect yourself. And I think that that's what this debate comes down to, is where is that line? Where's the line between security and freedom? And we could go back and forth on statistics all night, guys. We have a stack of studies over here, and they have a stack of studies over here. We've talked about it before. We've talked about it before this debate even started. This is not going to be won by statistics. There are people who have come out with numbers on both sides that make their side look really good. It's really easy to do. I'm political science, trust me. I know how to do it. So is Parker. But the important thing to remember in all of this, okay, the important thing to remember is that when it comes down to a situation of you sitting in a classroom, in the status quo of where we are right now, someone could walk in and not be stopped. And that's the heart of the whole issue. That's the heart of the whole issue. Are you comfortable with that as a concept, first of all? And then secondly, is this an issue worth the size that we're making it? So I have to talk about kind of the small number of self-defense examples that were brought up. The fact that self-defense examples even exist is a reason to accept the side of what we're bringing forward. And my partner will reiterate this, but guys, if there's a chance that we can deter one of these examples that we see happening in the news too often, if there's a chance that we can deter that from happening, we should take it. And what we bring up in the studies that we've been talking about tonight is that it can be an effective deterrence. The reason that we might have even lower examples, I mean, I could read you numbers. I'm not going to. It's not worth it. I could read you numbers of how crime rates go down. They could read numbers how crime rates go up. It's weird, isn't it? But just remember that whenever we're talking about the deterrence factor, and whenever we're talking about the possibility of someone walking in, you being able to defend yourself with the 3 self-defense things that I talked about earlier, and we can prevent just one from happening, then it's worth it.
So I couldn't agree more that, if these are absolutely tragedies and we do want to stop them, I'm for any measure that we can take to deter it. But my point is that I understand that having a weapon on your body and having a personal weapon with you, I understand the perceived notion that makes you safer, right? That I feel safe if I'm carrying a gun. I feel that I can act and that I would be able to stop an active shooter. I understand that. I think that's kind of been a big issue that's on people's minds. That's why I kind of talk about that. But I'm not really interested as much in perceived fear as much as I am the statistical possibility that you could actually defend yourself. And the stats don't show that. And I know that, again, I'm referring to numbers, but I think numbers are important here. I think that they matter. I think that if only one in 13 years has been stopped by that, I don't think it's likely to change. I think we need to rely on our law enforcement to do that. It's not going to. Having a gun isn't something that's going to deter as much as it might feel like it might. The statistics don't support that that's something that you would actually be able to use in that situation to do that.
So I think tonight we've established a fair footing into this particular incident, into this particular bill. To kind of reiterate what my colleague said over here, this is not going to make government bigger. We as conservatives like small government, okay? I'm also a libertarian inside. I like small government, I really do. But in instance, the bill as it stands is simply deducting out information. It's taking it right out, okay? And that's all it's doing. And as Jake said, if there is a chance, just a small single chance, that someone could use a weapon, okay, that they were able to have, and stop themselves from being hurt, then we should do this, okay? We must. We have the obligation to do so because we ought to do it, to help these students, us, our community, to defend themselves. And if there is that chance that someone is going to use this, we need to take it. And that's all I have to say.
All right, well, I think we should all applaud. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for getting all dressed up and coming and arguing for all of us today. So we'll go ahead and move on into the town hall question and answer period. So if you guys have some questions, feel free to just kind of line up and professors and